Hello, my name is Amy Shawley, and today I'm going to show you an idea on how to make texture from my book, Acrylic Texture Techniques, Rock, Metal, and Wood. Now what I thought might be fun is instead of doing a step-by-step out of the book and following the exact directions, is that I would show you a project idea and change some of the directions a little bit to give you an alternative approach to the project. So some of you may know that I have a book. It's 15 projects step by step on how to create surfaces that look like rock, metal, and wood. So for today, I would like to work out of my wood chapter and make a project that I call fence post. The fence post project involves making a recipe out of a couple different pastes, putting some texture into them using some brushes, and then letting that dry and adding color. So the part of this project that I want to change is the recipe for the colors that I'm adding. So in this case I used some browns, a little bit of blue, but what I want to show you is how to get some metallic effects going with iridescent colors. So part 1 is going to be how to make the texture, and part 2 is applying the color. Part 1 of this project is to mix up equal parts of two different pastes, one called light molding paste, the other one called fiber paste, both made by Golden Artist Colors. They come in jars, and all I've done is to scoop out some of each paste onto a plate as my palette. Now what I want to do is use a painting knife and mix it up. I'm cutting the pastes together. This keeps it kind of a rough mixture. I am not too concerned about getting this cleanly homogenized. So if there are some streaks of the fiber paste running through the light molding paste, that's perfectly all right. And that's actually going to add to the randomness of the fence post texture that I'm trying to achieve. Once your paste recipe is mixed, you are going to take a wide brush and scoop up a hearty amount of the recipe and start to block this in on the panel. I'm going to cover my whole surface moving one direction with my paste. You can tell so far that as I move a brush through the paste, it retains some texturing effects while the bristles move through. So when I get some of these little nubs, some of those I'm going to keep and some I'll smooth out. So I'm going to keep working this paste over the surface with this wide brush using light pressure. And also, if you move from more of a parallel position with the brush, the more parallel the brush is to the surface of the panel, the more I swipe off of the brush instead of gouge out. So keep moving the brush. Now if you start to see, I'm pushing some of this paste back over existing paste and getting these interesting marks. So I can scoop up some of this paste and go back the other way, allowing these texture valleys to form, but I'm still moving the brush in the same grain. So after I get my big brush marks blocked in here, I'm going to go back in with a small brush and etch out more individual textures as I go. now that I've textured my board, you can start to see the benefits of using two different pastes in this surface. Light molding paste is an absorbent paste, and when it's dry it has a little bit of a tooth to it. And while it's not rough by any means, and you can rough it up by giving it some texture with these brushes, it certainly doesn't have the roughness or the fiber content that the fiber paste has. So when I mix the two together, I get these random dispersions of some fiber texture and then some of that light molding texture, and it really varies the surface interest here with the wood grain that I'm trying to create. So you can see as my brush flares up on some of these textures, I'm getting those peaks of the fiber paste coming through. So the next step for this is to let this dry and come back and add color. It's time to add color to my fence post surface, but before I go in with my iridescent color, what I want to do is prep this with a coat of raw umber. I really love the way iridescent colors, especially these lighter ones, look over darker colors. So raw umber has a warm tone to it. You could certainly go in with carbon black or even dioxazine purple, Payne's gray. There's all sorts of really wonderful dark colors that you can use under here, but today I'm going to use this brown. I put a few drops of raw umber on my palette, and before I put it onto my paste, I'm going to dip my brush in a little bit of water and use the water to thin down the brown. This is going to help it level down into the texture valleys of my paste. Is dry now, and if you take a closer look, you can see that by adding a little bit of water into that fluid acrylic color, it allows me to get some staining going on. So the color is actually resting into the grooves of the texture and not canceling it out. You're going to see that there's a little bit of dark and lighter area here. Maybe there's a little bit more water in this section and less over here. Having a little bit of variation in this layer is perfectly fine. So I want to add a little bit of water to my silver to proceed with the next layer of color, again so that the silver is going to rest into the valleys of this texture the way that the raw umber is doing. My layer of iridescent silver is dry, and what you're going to see here is that because I thinned it with a little bit of water, not only did I allow it to level into the valleys of the texture, but I diluted the silver a little bit, so the peaks of the texture underneath that are still brown are showing through. And this is actually what I'm looking for. I want to have a little bit of brown showing itself, because then this looks like more of a tarnished silver instead of a brand new silver. I am going to add one more layer of silver just to brighten up some of these areas, but I'm going to paint them on selectively. So what I've done here is to mix a little bit of water again with my iridescent silver, and that's to get it to level into the texture valleys as I mentioned before. I don't want to cancel out my texture. I want my paint to be thin enough that I can still see my brush marks underneath. I'm going to pick out a few areas to enhance the silver. I'm not going to cover the whole surface, but just brighten up some areas and leave some of these darker spots showing through. By brightening up my silver by adding a second layer, what I'm doing here is adding a fun illusion of depth. I get a little bit of my brown showing through. I've got that first layer of silver that was a little bit more translucent, and then this brighter layer of silver on top. So with the same color and adding different amounts of water or multiple layers, I can start to build a lot of surface variation here, which is really nice. Now if I want to create some more depth and really try to push out some of these texture peaks a little bit more, I can go back into my texture valleys with more raw umber. For my last pass of color, I have switched to a smaller brush and I've put clean water on it. And I'm going to start by brushing the water into some of the valleys of this texture. And by doing this, I'm creating a channel and a pathway for my raw umber to move along. And my raw umber is going to flow into the channels where I put the water, and I'm not getting such a harsh brush stroke going from here. The water extends the drying time of my paint a little bit, so if I don't like what I did, I can go back and lift a little bit off. I can manipulate the color a little bit while it's still wet. That's all for today. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope you'll join me again.